guys have had a great weekend so far. A little taste, last taste, let's hope, of winter. All right. And but glad you're here. We're continuing our series called Bystander. And if you are wondering what really this means, have you ever been a bystander to watch something happen and you have a story to tell? You ever gone somewhere, experienced something, saw something happen, and you're like, yeah, that's it, you know, and you can't wait to get home. You can't wait to come back and tell everybody about what you saw. Well, that's exactly what this is about today. We actually take the life of John and what he experienced when he was hanging out with Jesus, if you will. I mean, he was actually the bystander watching the life of Jesus happen over a period of time, over these 3 or so years that Jesus was doing ministry before his death. And so in doing that, he wrote some of this down. He wanted people to know and to understand who Jesus really was. And John was one of the closest disciples to Jesus. He was one of the ones who had this connection point. He had something that was about his relationship with Jesus that was a deeper level. You ever had a best friend? Well, I think John would say his best friend was Jesus. You know, I think I would love to be able to say that, you know, that my best friend is Jesus. And can you imagine John? John was able to actually hang out with him. I mean, he actually was there. He watched him go through things. He watched him do normal life. He watched him interact with people. He watched him do the things that we would do in any circumstance. When you're with somebody, you watch them do these things. You're a bystander. And that's exactly what John was. John was this bystander to the life of Jesus. And he captured this story. He captured the things, and it really wasn't just stories made up or fabricated. You know, like the old fisherman stories, you know? I caught 2 fish and they were this big, you know? Actually, they were that big, right? So you get the idea. You know, it's not like that. John actually wrote this down so that over a period of time, and John probably, when he wrote this, he had no idea how long what he wrote would be opened and read and talked about before, you know, people, and with lives being changed all along during that period of time. You ever think about that? The stories that maybe you tell, that you pass down, and you pass it down to somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And that's exactly what John was doing. He was passing this incredible history, timeline of Jesus' life. And John captured it in a way that was different. Matter of fact, John was a much more emotive guy. He was very emotional. He picked up on people's feelings. He picked up on what was going on in their lives, and he was able to bring that in. And so even today, when we look at the event that was actually claimed to be the very first thing that Jesus did to prove who he was, the first sign, the first miracle that Jesus did, you're going to see that he was very active in normal life of things that were going on. And so sometimes we think of these stories as these things that are just out there that randomly happened or whatever, but there was a great plan behind all of it. I asked you a big question last week, and we're going to continue to ask this question because I believe it's important. Do you just believe in God, or do you believe God? See, it's one thing to say, I believe God exists. I even believe some of these stories. I believe some of these things happen. But do you believe God for who he is, what he's promised, what he's said to you? Like we sang about this morning, where if he says you're forgiven, do you believe God in that? Or do you still hang on to guilt and shame and issues in your life that just hold you back, that maybe bring you anxiety or depression or whatever it may be? Do you believe God when he says that you're his child? You know, if you trust him and believe him in your heart to be the one to forgive your sin, then he says you're his son or daughter. I mean, that's an incredible thing to think about. And to be the brother of Jesus, you know. I mean, I think of that to myself. My goodness, I never had a brother, you know. And I'm sure that Jesus treats me a lot better than a physical brother that I would have had here on earth would have, you know. How many of you had a brother? Anybody have a brother? Sure. Okay, so those of you who had brothers, did they ever pick on you or anything? Yeah, sure. But imagine this, you know, if you think about it, being God's son or daughter, you are considered a brother. Jesus is a brother to you. That's an amazing thought. Welcomes us into the family, adopts us in. He gives us the right and inheritance to everything that God owns. He brings us into that. And you might be a little skeptical of that at first. You might actually say, I'm not sure I believe all of that. You may be watching today and you may say, I just don't believe all of that. I just don't know if I can. And so last week I asked you this big question and I ended it with this. I didn't end it with the believing question. I asked you, what would cause you this problem? What causes you to hesitate to believe or trust? What is it that would cause you? And even if you have been a follower of Jesus for a long time in your life, you still have those doubts. You still have times in your life where it's hard to believe that God has placed you where you are, that you're going through what you're going through. Has God forgotten me? And so I want to ask you, what was it that was in your mind? What did you think about maybe even throughout the week a little bit? I hope you did. I hope it challenged you enough to make you think through the week, what was it that's just making me hesitate to believe? Is it something that's happened to you? Is it something that you've been told? Is it something that you maybe went through? I have these things that I believe can be the case. Maybe it's something that you were taught. Maybe it was something that you were taught. Somebody taught you something about God that really in thinking about it really wasn't true. It's these things we say that about God that God never intended for us to say about Him. Things like, if you just have more faith, if you could just have that, and if something goes wrong in your life, or something happens to you, or something doesn't go the way you thought it should, then maybe someone said to you, you know what, you just didn't have enough faith. If you'd have just had more faith, then that wouldn't have happened to you. Wow. Is that really true? But maybe we've been taught that. Actually, maybe we have been taught that there's certain things that we can trust in, but then somebody's come along and said, you can't trust that because this happened and this happened. Maybe it was a verse of Scripture that maybe someone passed on to you and they've said that to you, but then somebody comes up and says, you can't believe the Bible. You can't believe what's written there. Those Scriptures are so old and you can't rely on what they say. And so maybe you were taught or you heard something. Maybe you were treated wrong. Maybe somebody treated you in a wrong way or you misunderstood something that happened in a situation and you felt like you were treated in a way that just pushed you away from God. It made it difficult for you to trust or believe. And it could be that you were a follower for a long time, and a lot of people are having trouble with this right now. People are giving up on the faith because they feel like it wasn't what they thought it was going to be, or it didn't measure up. There was something about it, and you feel like you were treated wrongly by someone or something or whatever, and you'll use those terms of the church hurt me or this happened or whatever. And quite honestly, being treated that way, we've all gone through experiences where we've been treated wrong, right? And I don't know about you, but it doesn't feel good. It's not great. And it can really pull us away. It can make us hesitate to believe or trust. And then maybe you feel tricked. Maybe you feel tricked. Maybe someone told you that if you became a Christian, if you became a follower of Jesus, then all of your problems would be solved. Everything would be just great. Everything would be fine, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. Maybe that's your first experience. Boy, you don't know real life until you've met Jesus and everything. And then all of a sudden your life falls apart right after that. And you're like, really? You feel tricked. This isn't right. I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for heaven on earth. Why isn't everything good? Good grief. I'm still living paycheck to paycheck. I thought something would have given a little here on this. But you feel tricked. Like maybe somebody gave you a sales pitch just to get you in, make themselves feel better about themselves, and be puffed up in front of a lot of other people, but then they kind of forgot you. You kind of came in and it was kind of, You feel tricked? Oh, and then maybe you've been tested. Maybe something tested you. Maybe it was something that you weren't expecting, like a breakup of a relationship. Or maybe it was something that hit you hard, like you found out that you got a bad diagnosis at the doctor's office, or maybe you lost a job, or you had an issue with a child in your home, somebody you've watched grow up all the day, and it was so much easier just changing their diapers, but when they got older, Then you had to go through everything that was in the diaper in a different way. And you feel tested, right? Maybe somebody that you counted on for a long time and you just didn't know. But you get tested in the situation and it makes you hesitate. It makes you hesitate to believe or trust. Well, I want to tell you what happens when we hesitate and we know that there's something about this that we want to keep doing. There's something about the faith or being involved, or there's something that's still there. And it could be that many of us, and I'll just admit, I've done it too. We've all done it from time to time where we do this thing called going through the motions. We go through these motions over and over again. We actually come to services, or we get ourselves involved in something, or we even serve, and we find ourselves going into this process. I don't really feel like doing this, but I will, Or I don't really want to be here today, but I have to go, That one wasn't funny, but okay, that's fine. For those of you watching, there's a kid up here stealing the show, all right? I'll just tell you that. And this is what happens to us. This is what happens. We get to a point to where we just do it over and over, and we become calloused. We become calloused to some of the greatest things in life. Being connected to God, knowing who He is, being able to talk to Him and feel like He's real. But we just kind of just believe in God. We don't believe God. We kind of get to that point to where we're just going through motions. And I got to tell you this. We can confuse this. We can confuse going through the motions with believing. We tell ourselves a lie over and over again that as we're going through this and we're doing these things, somehow it'll get better. Somehow I'll get through this, or I'll get past it. Maybe when I grow up and become older, okay? Well, let me just tell you, I've gotten older, and it doesn't change. Okay? The whole idea and the concept of believing God, believing what He said, what He's promised, what He said He would do, those things are hard. And especially for somebody who's like skeptical. Okay, many of us are coached and we're told, hey, if you just go to church, you'll be better. Everything will be fine. It's almost like it's a stamp, well, better get myself to church this Sunday, and if I do, then things will maybe get better. I just tell you, that ain't going to work. If that's what you're coming for, some kind of stamp on your passport for the week, for good things to happen, not going to work. Won't happen. That's not what it's about. That's not why we come and gather together. That's not why we come here. We come here to say, wow, what an amazing week I've had. God has been all over it. Okay? That's why we really come. And if we come for other things, if we're just going through motions, then you know what happens, right? The bottom will fall out, and we'll feel like we were taught something wrong. We'll be tested. We feel like we were tricked. So we go to John today, and we go to John's account, the thing that he wrote down, this story of the first sign, the first miracle that Jesus did in the presence of people. So it's that time of year. We all have gotten our wedding invitations, right? Have you gotten a wedding invitation yet? How many? I'm just curious to know. How many? And if you're online, if you wouldn't, please chat with somebody and tell them how many wedding invitations you've already got. How many have you gotten at least one wedding invitation already? All right. Okay, see. How many of you gotten 2 wedding invitations? Anybody like that? Oh, wow. Okay. How about 3? Anybody gotten 3? Oh, boy. So can I just tell you, they're still paying money to give plasma. All right? Just letting you know that. And you may say, how am I going to actually pay for, to go to weddings? And I've been the father of the bride, and I know what it is to host a wedding and have them in and be a part, invite people to come and everything. I know what that's like. And so you want to make sure there's plenty of everything there. You want to do this? Well, we find in John chapter 2, and this is an amazing story. But before we even go there, I want to make sure you understand why John wrote this story. John had a reason for writing the story. And to do that, we go to the last verse in John's whole thing. This is what he said. In John chapter 20, verse 31, he said, "But these are written that you may" what? Say it real loud. Believe. Good, I like that. That Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And that by what? Believing you may have life in his name. The whole purpose was so that you would believe. He wanted us, when we read this account of Jesus, that we would actually believe that Jesus existed, that there was evidence for who he was, and that we could trust him, and that Jesus was coming with purpose. He was coming to be the Messiah because he was the Son of God. See, he was the Messiah. He wasn't the Messiah and the Son of God. He was the Messiah because he was the Son of God. Okay? Very important point to understand. This idea of being a Messiah meant that he could forgive sin, that he could change your life, he could take something that was old and make it new again. That's what they were counting on, was him to be the Messiah. And the only reason he could be the Messiah because he was the Son of God. God came here in the flesh. That's who Jesus was. And so when he did that, he did it so we would believe and have life. So believing should bring life. Let's just keep that in mind. So I want to take you back to the story where John starts this idea, going to a wedding, and what happens. So I'm just going to walk through the narrative of it and just kind of give you an idea of the story, and then we'll bring some conclusions when we get to the end. It says this, on the third day, and this idea, what's the third day here? Well, John is counting days in which he's seen things happen. So remember, if you were here last week, you remember this. You remember that Andrew and Philip and Peter, who used to be Simon, but Jesus changed his name. Remember all that? They were all together, and Jesus was asking them to join them. Nathanael was a part of that. Remember? And as they became a part of that, that happened on one day. So now here we're at the third day. This is the third day that John has been observing, watching Jesus and writing this down. So he says, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. Back in Jewish culture, if you knew a wedding was happening or you heard about it, you were automatically invited. Okay? You didn't have to send out all the save the dates and then turn around and send out all of the invitations and then send email and text reminders. You know, those kind of things. You didn't have to do that. You just came. And the gift registry, you didn't have to go down to the local Target and pick up and look and see what did they sign up for. There was always certain gifts that the bride and groom would always need. And so it was a way to stock their shelves, to get them ready for life. And so this is kind of the idea. Here's this whole thing. And so Jesus was invited. His mother was there, Mary was there. We don't see Joseph written here, and we don't really know for sure, but we believe that probably Joseph had already passed away. You know? And it would have been difficult for him to have attended, obviously, in that condition. We don't know for sure why he wasn't there, but that was it. I mean, that was probably what happened. This was, Joseph, we know, was a little bit older than Mary, and so it was possible that he wasn't living. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." I kind of even almost hear a whine in her voice when she said it. They're out of wine. What do we do? We're out of wine. Why would Mary be so, is it because she loved wine so much? Why are we out of this? No, if you think about this, you see the story continue. We actually see why this was the case. But she goes to Jesus and says, they're out of wine. And Jesus looks at her, and this word, the very first word probably sounds like, man, he's being so disrespectful. I can't believe that Jesus was disrespectful. Woman, why do you involve me? You hear it that way, don't you? If you heard it that way, then my guess is you've watched a NASCAR race. Okay? When you look at the original language, the word woman or the phrase woman was actually one of endearment. It would actually have been more and probably better if the people who translated into the New International Version, which that's what we're reading, if they would have said, my dear lady, or it could have been mother, You know, that was a little more than what this is. This is really a term of endearment. Now, you might say, how would I know that? Well, I'm going to encourage you that when you read the Bible, don't just read it. Maybe try studying it a bit. And there's this new thing, it's been out, I don't know, just a short time, called the internet. And you can go there and find incredible resources where you can find the answers to some of these things. I would encourage you to do that. Or maybe just go and order a good study Bible, all right? And look, some of that will be written right there for you. But the idea, woman, why do you involve me? Mom, what do you need from me? I mean, they're the ones who planned this wedding. I didn't have anything to do with the planning. Trust me, if I'd have planned it, there would have been plenty of wine. Yeah, I don't know. He didn't say that. That's not the point. The point of the story, though, is this. Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. Mom, I'm not here really to, I just came to the wedding because you invited me. We know the family. Mom, you're probably Mary probably was helping the family. She was probably the wedding coordinator, if you'd want to call it that. And the reason was because of this. His mother said to the servants, do what he says. You can tell she had the responsibility to actually speak up and say to the servants there that were serving all the people at the tables, hey, listen, if he's got a plan, you want to go with it. Now, of course, she knew who he was, and if he's going to speak, he's at least going to have more wisdom than she had. What do we do when we're out of wine? Now, it would have been probably appropriate to think that in the setting of the tables, that at each table there would have been a pitcher or a wineskin or something that had the wine contained in it. There would have been the wine in each one. So the easiest thing would have been to do would be to just fill those back up with wine, right? And so what do? They go, do they go and get water? Jesus has a plan. This is what he says to her, or to them. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. So you can imagine how big these pots were, all right? And if you look at this, you think to yourself, 6 of them, why so many? Because Jewish religious tradition that they would do is everything they would do during the wedding, during the ceremony. You go up and shake hands with somebody, you'd have to run water over your hands. You wouldn't put your hands into the pot. You'd get something out, a cup of water or whatever, and you would pour it over your hands. Why? Because ceremony says that as soon as you touch anything of this world, other people, other things, that you become unclean and that you needed to ceremonially wash. Now, this was something that came from way back in the Old Testament, a part of the law. It was part of the Jewish tradition, religious tradition that made them right before God. But they would have to do this constantly. And it would be, similar. You remember how over the last couple of years that we were all encouraged to use hand sanitizer and go to the sink and wash your hands over and over again anytime you would touch surfaces or people or anything, And so it's the same concept, except it was for religious purposes. Now, you can imagine for them, this would have been unusual because ceremonial washing was done in a way that they felt they were being made right before God because they had made themselves unclean to other things. And so in going through this, can you imagine being at a wedding and you're there and you're touching things, then all of a sudden you got to go wash your hands again. You got to go pour water over your hands. Now, this was not a lather up and, 20 seconds or sing happy birthday or whatever it was they were telling us to do. It wasn't anything like that. This was ceremony. This was really to show God that you cared. Honestly, it was very meaningless. Can you imagine going through it over and over and over again? And they did this to prove to God that they were clean. Now, obviously, this doesn't work, all right? This doesn't work. That's not what really was the plan, and Jesus knew this. These pots had water in them, but they weren't full because they had been there for a while at the wedding. So there had been a lot of people pouring water on their hands, Time to dance with the bride, da-da-da. Okay, Dad got to go over and wash his hands. You know, oh, I just saw somebody, shook hands. I did that. Oh, I just took my plate through the buffet line. Now I got to sit it down and go wash my hands. I've touched things. I'm unclean before God. I've got to do this. So they were going through the motions. You can imagine the water level was going down in the pots. So what really? Why is this? Let me just say this to you. Over and over again, people will do things where they're trying to impress God with their motions, their actions, the things they do. And can I just say this? Going through the motions, and it's true, going through the motions will not produce belief. Just because we're going through things, you know, if you don't really feel it, if it's not something real, but you're just going through the motions of it, does that all of a sudden change the way you believe in something? Just because you're doing it? No, it has to be something that touches us personally. It has to be something that's actually brought change to us. For them, this was just going through the motions of ceremonially washing. Now, Jesus knew this, and he knew that that was not going to bring them to a point of believing that he was there to do something new, something different. And so you go back to the story, and this is what happened. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." They're out of wine. He says, "Fill them with water." Now, I think this is pretty important. He said, "Fill them to the brim, all the way to the top." And then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." The one who was in charge, probably kind of what you want to call the best man maybe. The guy who was overseeing it. Some people say this might have been the bride's father, perhaps. But it was somebody who was really overseeing it. And he was seeing what was going on. And so what's he do? He makes sure that these ceremonial pots, now, when you fill those up, what are they doing with those pots of water? What have they been doing? They have been going through the motions all the time. But he says, fill them up all the way to the brim. Jesus was about to do something that was going to change everything for them. They would no longer have any source of going through the motions anymore. He was going to change things up for them. That was the old way of doing it. That was the old way that the law would point to. And Jesus was about to change it. And let me just tell you, this should be meaningful for every one of us. And John knew that. As the bystander watching all this happen, he watches Mary go up and speak to Jesus. He sees Jesus' response. And then Mary says, "Just do what he says." He tells them, "Fill all those ceremonial water pots with water." Okay, so he's getting ready to have everybody wash up again. Everybody's going to do it at once and then perform a miracle. Well, you know, if Jesus was going to replace wine on the table, there would have been those containers, right? There would have been the ones for the wine, so why didn't he just have them fill the water into those containers on each of the tables, the pitchers, the wineskins? Why didn't he say, put water in there? Because if you know anything about this story, you know what's about to happen. Okay? You know what's about to happen. Actually, as the story goes on, it goes like this. They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. And he did not realize where it had come from. Though the servants who had drawn the water knew, they knew where it came. He didn't know. He had no idea that they went over and got it out, a cupful, out of the ceremonial. Well, you wouldn't do that. That was not drinking water. That was washing water. You know? You wouldn't drink out of that. And so, what's the difference here? What was the thing? And this is great. Look at his response. It's amazing. The next part of the verse says, "Then he called the bridegroom aside and said," the master of the banquet drank up from that cup that they got out of the pot, and he drank it up and he says, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first. You get your guests really happy to be there. If you get the idea, you know? Have a couple of glasses of wine or a few more, and what happens? Well, hey, it doesn't matter what you bring out, you know, at that point." He says this, you know, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. He said, what's the idea of bringing the Manischewitz out first and not bringing the good stuff? Why bring out the cardboard box stuff at the beginning and not at the end? I don't get it. Why did you wait till now to bring out the good stuff? This is what's great. He says, you've saved the best till last. Now, who did this? Who was the person who did this? Who was the one who took these ceremonial wash pots, these ones that were there to ceremonially go through the motions? Jesus says, well, we're past that now. We've gone from something old, and now we've made it something new. Here now, they had 6 times, and let's just say 20 gallons. They had 120 gallons of wine. This wedding was going to be able to go on for a while, okay? Those are the kind of guests you can't get rid of, okay? You kind of got the idea of what's going on here. It's an amazing difference. There's a shift from the old way to the new way. Something that was old, the going through the motions of ceremonially washing, and Jesus, he took the moment of being invited to a wedding, being invited to just a social event for a lot of people. And what did he do? He didn't just, do it. Many people will make this all about the bride and the bridegroom to make sure they had enough wine. He's just so kind. Jesus loves people so much that he made sure they didn't run out of wine. Had nothing to do with that. It actually was Jesus interacting and using something that was everyday life. Something that was a part of what was going on. And what did he do? He said, look, I'm going to change the old to new. You don't need the old law anymore. I've come. And what I'm offering you is new. What I'm offering you will never run out. What I'm offering you is you don't have to go through the motions anymore. This is real. You can have a personal touch with God himself because of Jesus. He said, you don't have to go through this old anymore. You can go to the new. You see, Jesus came to change the old to new. And if that's true, let me just show you this. If you contrast what the old life is like, what the old way of following the law and going through the motions, this is what that feels like. When you go through the motions and you're going through these things, it's lifeless. It's meaningless. It's confusing. I'm doing all the right things. Why isn't God doing something in my life? It's because we're going through motions where we've not allowed God to be a part of our life. We've not allowed him to take the old that's in us and make it new again. And it's true, isn't it? That there's some things that we just hang on to. Things that were a part of our old way of life. And maybe you're going through it right now. You're hanging on to something old in your life that's making you go through the motions. It's not creating belief in your life. It's not drawing you any closer to God. If anything, it may be pushing you away. It's making you hesitate to believe and trust because of these old things in your life. And why would we want something that's lifeless and meaningless? We'd want something that's new. New life. That's what Jesus came to offer. That's why he did it that way. If he was just about the wine, he would have easily just said, fill up all the pitchers on the tables. And he would have turned that into wine. No, he didn't do it that way. He actually said, no. See all those pots over there that we're using for things that you guys are just going through the motions with this. I'm here to change all that. You don't have to go through motions to prove yourself to me. Here's what I want. I want your life, your heart, and I can make it new. This is great. New life, it's life-giving. I mean, there's no question. It's life-giving. It's renewing. It's purposeful. It gives much more to us. Jesus didn't come here just to do miracles or signs that just had a small effect. He came in teaching and saying, listen, everything that was old, all this stuff of going through the motions, I want you to have a personal relationship with me. I want it to be new and fresh. I want it to have meaning. I want it to be life-giving. It's all about this concept. But I have to take you back to the big question. Do you just believe in God? Do you just believe that He exists? Because if you do, then you think Jesus is kind. He just wanted to make sure that couple had enough wine for their thing. Jesus showed what it is to obey your parents. Ever heard that? Ever heard that from this passage? You know, Jesus just wanted to show that He would obey His mom. That's going to teach these young people, you know? They need to follow what their mom and dad says. You know, no, that's not at all what it is. Has nothing to do with that. Jesus was saying, I want to pass the old off and turn it into something new. Where you don't have to just go through the motions. We don't have to just follow through even when you don't feel like it. I don't have to do things just to get God's approval. That's not what it's about. It has everything to do with the fact that we live an old life and we're bent toward just going through the motions, but God wants more for us than that. He didn't want us just to believe that He exists or just believe in a few of these stories or maybe a twisted version of some of them. No. He wants us to hear this eyewitness account of a man who we know lived. It was real. History proves that John existed, and he wrote this down so that we would believe that Jesus came to be the Messiah because He was the Son of God, so that we might have life. That's why he wrote this. That's why he told this story. You see, believing God, it leads to life. It leads to life. And so, why would any of us, especially, I say this especially to people who maybe have said, yes, I'm a Christian. Yes, I've followed Jesus a lot of my life, maybe. Or maybe it's just something recent to you, but recent enough that you've allowed some of this old to creep back in, and it's like, how in the world? Why would I want it to not be fresh? Why would I not want it to be real to me? Jesus came to give us life. I know that because that's why John said he wrote this in the first place. Why he captured all of us. And you know something? A lot of us would say, what would knock me out of it is if I had evidence. If I just had evidence, real evidence. Let me show you this. The last verse of the chapter says, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which He revealed His glory, and His disciples, what did they do? Say it real loud. Believed in Him. See, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs. It was the first, and John never refers to these incredible things that Jesus did. He never refers to them as miracles. He calls them signs. And what do signs do? They point you in a direction that John wanted to say, here's a sign for you to believe. Here's another sign for you to believe this. Don't just believe in God, but believe God for what He says. You can trust Him. He's going to take the old and make it new. That's why He did this miracle. That's why He did this sign. And it's great. Through which He revealed His glory. The whole idea of why He could say He was the Messiah, because He was the Son of God. The reason why He could say that is because He was taking something that was old and was making it new. Only God could do that. You ever feel like you've gone through the motions? Maybe you're at that point right now. I'm pushing myself through the motions. I'm doing it maybe you're doing it for somebody else or whatever. God doesn't want you to go through the motions. God wants it to be real in your life. Taking what was once old and making it new. And what happened? Because of all that, because of what was seen, John was there. They believed because Jesus provided evidence that He could be believed. Jesus provided the evidence right there in front of them. I want to say this morning. As we've been going through this, and you've heard John write this down, and now we're reading it and seeing what took place. Are you hesitating to believe God? I mean, maybe you're not hesitant at all to believe in God, that He's existing and that He's out there. But do you believe God that He wants to make the old new? Have you trusted that completely? Maybe you've even said, God, I want you to forgive me. I want you to get me to where I need to be with you, but I don't know, I'm just having a hard time giving you this part of my life. I'm hanging on to it because I just feel like I need to be in control of it. I feel like I need to be the one dealing with it. I feel like it's my fault. I don't want to give that to you, God. That's a mess. My life's a mess. I don't want to give that to you. Well, let me just tell you, it will continue to be a mess as long as you're the one in charge. Because that's old. You'll find yourself going through the motions, and we know that going through the motions isn't going to help you believe anymore. You need to give it to Him and allow Him to be the one who says, I've got this. I'll take what's old in your life and I'll make it new. You don't have to go through the motions to prove to me anything. If we had to do that, none of us would measure up. And God knew that. Jesus knew that. He came to make the old new. When John, as a bystander and eyewitness to this, wrote it down, he wanted us to believe it, so we would see the glory of God revealed. And the greatest sign that God does is as He changes our hearts from old to new. Maybe that's the step you need to take. Maybe that's the thing that would be your next step, would be to say, God, I want you to take my old life and make it new. Don't go through the motions. You can believe God. He can change from old to new.